There is a Greek proverb, "A society grows great when old men plant trees, whose shade they know they shall never sit in." What are the greatest examples of this in human history? Modern sewer system in the 1860s. He foresaw the insane population growth, and when all the calculations were made on how big to bore the pipes underground, he essentially said, "Nah, let's double it." Now, infrastructure that would have been unable to cope in the 1960s is still in use today. During the Napoleonic Wars, there was a Royal Navy admiral who went on leave used to wander his country estate planting oak trees to provide timber for the Navy. It's estimated they are about ready now. Annie's people aged 60 or older volunteered to fix problems in the Fukushima nuclear power plant, knowing that they would probably die of natural causes before the radiation damaged them in the long run. I don't know if they actually did it though. The Cassini family map, a first-of-its-kind map of France, it took 4 generations of family members and 6 decades to complete. Imagine being that second family member. Your whole life your father works on this map, only for you to work your whole life on it while raising your son to do the same, and it takes a whole nother life for it to be completed. In a very literal sense, the landscape gardens of Capability Brown. He carefully crafted these gardens, directing the planting of trees and bushes to create a beautiful vista, where it would take decades for the plants to actually grow to fulfill his vision. Norway's sovereign wealth fund. That generation could have taken a selfish view and just taken the cash, or politicians just gone on a vote-buying spree. But it's independently invested and managed for the benefit of future generations. The preservation of Chauvet Cave was second to none in the archaeological field. From day one, the 3 explorers who found it took the utmost care and precautions to ensure they left as little trace as possible in the unopened, pristine chapel of charcoal and ochre. There are strict limits and guidelines for traversing the cave and special access for research purposes, and no tourism. We've learned an immense amount about the site due to their forethought. Roosevelt and national parks. If he never did what he did, there wouldn't be any today. Corporate greed would have wiped it all out. Public infrastructure. People got to live to see the opening of one rail line or bridge, or several, but the integrated network of public infrastructure that took 100 years to grow and is still growing. Mabel Ping Huali was a suffragette, but because she was not a U.S. citizen, she knew that even if she succeeded, she would still not be able to vote. The giant cathedrals in Europe like Notre Dame would take over 100 years to build. So the person who started building it would work their whole life on it and know they wouldn't be alive to see it complete. Everyone that took their polio vaccine, you never get your childhood back, and none of those kids that suffered from polio will either. Ernst, along with his fellow researchers, they all starved themselves to death in order to preserve the Leningrad seed bank, which came under the heavy German attack during the siege of Leningrad, 1943. That's not a Greek proverb, it's the invention of a 20th century Quaker writer, whose creation was appropriated in the 1990s by politicians in the United States Congress. They added the byline Greek proverb to make themselves seem more intelligent. Insulin patent was sold for $1. We managed to fuck that one up, but it counts as planting the trees, even if we're too stupid to sit under the shade. Any scientific research that seems like a total waste of time and money right now, like the space race, medicines, nuclear fusion, etc. People might say we should just focus on improving morality and social justice, which is important, don't get me wrong, but let's be real, humans are dumb as rocks and we're always screwing things up. So, I'm hoping that eventually we'll come up with some quick fixes that keep us from wiping ourselves out as a species. Susan B. Anthony spent her entire life trying to get women the vote. She was fined for attempting to vote, and spent years organizing people to fight for the cause. She died in 1906, a decade before the 19th Amendment was ratified. Joseph Bazalgette, the man who designed London sewers in the 1860s, said, "Well, we're only going to do this once and there's always the unforeseen," and doubled the pipe diameter. If he had not done this, it would have overflowed in the 1960s. The Oxford English Dictionary, as dramatized in the movie The Professor and the Madman. The dictionary is never finished, but on goes the work. Nye Bevan, created the NHS in 1948, died in 1960. Absolute legend. Sadly, his legacy has been slashed to tatters and continues to take damage. Mendel discovered literally the seeds of the hereditary system in the mid-19th century, but if I recall well, nobody took it seriously until the early 20th century, like 30 years after his death. The civil rights movement. MLK knew he wouldn't be alive to see integration. The old Japanese people who volunteered to clean up nuclear waste sites from the WWII bombings. That they likely wouldn't live long enough to suffer the worst of the effects of radiation, so they did it to protect younger people from experiencing it and to clean up Japan for future generations. It's really heartwarming. Jonas Salk refusing to patent the polio vaccine or seek any profit from it in order to maximize its global distribution. During his famous television interview, Edward R. Murrow asked Salk who owned the patent to the polio vaccine. "Well, the people, I would say." Salk responded, "There is no patent. Could you patent the sun?" I'm more interested to know when and why so many old people stopped planting and caring about the trees to begin with. It's not as shady these days as the shade they enjoyed in their youth from their elders. Y'all know I'm not really talking about trees, right? Is a poor society one that cuts down the trees whose shade your children will never sit at? The Swedish king Gustav Vasa planted an entire forest of oaks for building battleships. The first batch was done 1975, a mere 400 years later. Not a single tree were allowed to be cut down unless needed to make sure that we would have the best ships in the world. Hopefully we'll soon include nuclear fusion reactors to the list. Bridges, you didn't do anything to earn that bridge. You didn't ask for it, pay for it, or build it yourself. You came into existence with a convenient way to cross natural barriers that would otherwise be massive detours to travel. Milton Hershey transferred all his wealth into a trust that to this day pays for a school for underprivileged youth. The Milton S. Hershey School is transformative and is endowed to last in perpetuity. Go enjoy a candy bar today. Carnegie Libraries. Andrew Carnegie donated the money to build over 2,500 libraries. 17th century mathematician John Napier spent 20 years calculating logarithm tables, which made calculations much easier. He died before publishing them, and it was his son that made them available to the world. Sydney Harbour Bridge. At the time it was built, there weren't enough cars in NSW to form a traffic jam on it. 100 years later, and it works exactly as it should. Most of Jimmy Carter's actions. I would like to hear about examples for the last, say, 40 years. I know there have been some, but it feels like all of those trapdoors have been closed and it's everybody for themselves. The national parks in the USA, they had the foresight to know that they needed to be protected and did something about it. Imagine what would happen these days. There'd be apartment buildings in Yellowstone if someone could make money off it. Literally any country with a robust social safety net. Jimmy Carter has done nothing except civil service for years after his presidency, building houses for those in need on a dang near daily basis. He is the old man planting trees for that which he will not enjoy the shade. It much about George Washington not being from the US, but setting the term limits precedent is probably a pretty big thing. A lot of electronic music devices use a protocol called Music Instrument Digital Interface MIDI to communicate with each other. Dave Smith, the leader of this development, made the technology open source. MIDI is in lighting now, Guitar World, and a bunch of stuff that guy didn't imagine it for. His contribution to the music industry is enormous, and no one has ever heard of the guy, unless they are into synthesizers. Every single person who chooses teaching as a profession, we get paid shiat. We do it because we love young people and are passionate about what we teach. Culture they knew to start over, without money, often scorned and discriminated against by the place they went to, in the hope their children would have a better life than they or their ancestors had. At some point, the American feminists of the 1800s realized that they wouldn't achieve the presidential vote in their lifetime. It was Elizabeth Cady Stanton who wrote to another activist about the need to start planning how to lay the groundwork for the next generation so that they could carry on the torch. I think I heard the letter read aloud in a documentary. It was incredibly moving, listening to how pragmatically she was helping build a future she would never get to share. That one guy, Johnny Appleseed, who went round the USA distributing apple seeds, now we are spoiled for choice thanks to his passion.